It is May 21st, 1943. A radio monitoring station somewhere on the American mainland. A technician sits at a console, headphones on, pencil moving across a transcript pad. He is copying a signal from Tokyo. This is routine work. America has been monitoring Japanese broadcasts since before the war. The pencil moves steadily. Then it slows. Then it stops. Through the static comes a formal voice. Composed, prepared, reading from what sounds like an official announcement. The transcriptionist knows the language well enough. Imperial Headquarters. Something significant. The pencil finds the page again, and then, unmistakably, the voice on the other end begins to break. On May 21st, 1943, a Tokyo radio announcer read a prepared statement from Imperial Headquarters and could not finish it without weeping. The Japanese Empire had just told its people something it had known for 33 days. Somewhere in the Pacific, 16 American pilots already knew. The man the announcer was weeping over had, in another life, been a guest in America. He had studied at Harvard, hitchhiked across the country, stood at the edge of American steel mills and watched the furnaces pour. He had counted the smokestacks. He had done the arithmetic. His name was Isoroku Yamamoto, and he was, by April of 1943, the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet, the most important single officer Japan had at sea. He was born in 1884 in Nagaoka, the son of a samurai of the old Nagaoka domain. His father was 56 years old when Isoroku came into the world, and the name given to the boy meant precisely that, 56. He grew up in a household that remembered what it was to carry a blade and answer to a lord. He never forgot where he came from. In photographs from his final weeks, he wears his white tropical dress uniform with the formal precision of a man who understands what uniforms mean. He was short, barely 5'3", but compact and powerful, broad across the shoulders, strong-featured, and on his left hand, the index and middle fingers were gone. He had lost them at Tsushima in 1905, when the Japanese Navy destroyed the Russian Baltic Fleet in a single afternoon, and young Ensign Yamamoto went into the battle and came out of it marked. He wore that absence for the rest of his life. The years after Tsushima took him outward. Naval attaché in Washington, student at Harvard, a man who stood in the American interior and stared at oil storage tanks the size of warehouses. He knew exactly what he was looking at. Japan and the United States occupied different economic planets. The gap was not a matter of strategy. It was a matter of arithmetic. In the 1930s, as the militarist faction in Tokyo grew louder and the appetite for expansion hardened into policy, Yamamoto argued against it. He argued in writing, in rooms full of men who did not want to hear it, and in the end, he argued too clearly for his own safety. The ultra-nationalists who controlled the army, and much of the machinery of government, regarded his opposition as treasonous. His life was threatened. His colleagues in the Navy, understanding that a man with his views could not safely remain visible in Tokyo, arranged his transfer. He was moved to Sea Command. Commander-in-Chief, Combined Fleet. It was protection, dressed up as a promotion. Before he left for sea, he wrote a letter to Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe. It was not a letter of enthusiasm. He put it plainly. In the first 6 to 12 months of a war with the United States and Great Britain, I will run wild and win victory upon victory. But then, if the war continues after that, I have no expectation of success. No equivocation, no diplomatic softening. A man who had seen the factories telling his government exactly what a long war would mean. They went to war anyway. The men who had wanted Yamamoto dead sent him to the sea. The men who sent him to the sea delivered him to the Americans. By the spring of 1943, the war had moved the way Yamamoto said it would. The early victories, Pearl Harbor, the sweep across the Pacific, had given way to the harder arithmetic. Midway in June 1942 had cost Japan 4 fleet carriers and the core of its naval aviation. Guadalcanal, 6 months of grinding attrition, had ended with Japanese forces withdrawing in February 1943. The tide had turned. Yamamoto understood this. He had understood it before it became undeniable. And in early April 1943, headquartered at Rabaul on the northeastern tip of New Britain, he launched what was meant to be a counter-offensive. Operation Waigo was a major air campaign, Army and Navy aviation combined, intended to hit American shipping and air power across the Solomons and New Guinea and demonstrate that Japan still controlled the skies. The offensive began on April 1st. The pilots came back with their reports. Ships sunk, aircraft destroyed. Numbers that suggested a substantial Japanese victory. Yamamoto received these tallies, accepted them, and on April 13th suspended the offensive. The campaign, as far as he knew, had achieved its purpose. What he did not know was that the numbers were wrong, wildly, systematically wrong. The American losses were a fraction of what the pilots claimed. The victory was a phantom. The skies over the Solomons looked, from the American side, essentially as they had before Waigo began. Yamamoto, presented with a success that had not occurred, decided he would personally visit the forward bases to congratulate the aviators. He would fly to Balalai, then to Shortland Island, then to Bouin. His subordinates raised concerns. The forward areas were contested. Enemy intelligence could not be ruled out. He overruled them. He scheduled the visit with the precision that everyone in the combined fleet knew was his signature. Specific aircraft, specific route, specific departure time, specific arrival time, everything written down, and then, encoded in JN-25D, transmitted. April 14th, 1943. The message arrives at multiple American radio intercept stations and is routed to Fleet Radio Unit Pacific at Pearl Harbor, FRUPAC. The code breakers go to work. It is not easy work. The Japanese have recently adjusted their cipher procedures, but by the time they finish, what sits on the decoded sheet is not a tactical communique. It is an itinerary. Departure times, aircraft types, route, fighter escort numbers, arrival time. The full schedule of the Commander-in-Chief, Combined Fleet, for April 18th. Commander Edwin Layton, Chief Intelligence Officer of the Pacific Fleet, reads it. Layton has spent years studying Japan, its language, its naval culture, its psychology. He was there before Pearl Harbor. He has lived with the weight of what good intelligence, poorly acted upon, can cost. He reads the message and goes down the hall at something close to a run. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, receives the transcript and reads it in silence. He is 58 years old, silver-haired, methodical. On a single page, he holds what might be the most valuable piece of intelligence in the Pacific War. He is also holding a problem. Acting on the message risks exposing something larger than one admiral's schedule. The ability to read JN-25, Japan's principal naval cipher, had helped win Midway. It is the foundation of America's intelligence advantage in the Pacific. Spending it to kill one man, however irreplaceable, means accepting that the Japanese may notice and change their codes. The capability that wins battles could be sacrificed for a single kill. Nimitz sits with this. He decides. The authorization runs up the chain and back down. President Roosevelt tells Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, to get Yamamoto. Knox conveys the order to Nimitz. Nimitz consults Admiral William Halsey, commanding the South Pacific. Cover stories prepared. Australian coast watchers in the jungle around Rabaul are to be credited if anyone asks. On April 17th, Nimitz authorizes the operation. To Halsey's headquarters, the word goes out, tally-ho. One detail did not escape the American planners. April 18, 1943, the scheduled intercept date, was exactly 1 year after Jimmy Doolittle's B-25s had appeared over Tokyo at low altitude and bombed the city that was supposed to be unreachable. The Americans noticed. They said nothing. They simply planned the mission. The aircraft were P-38 Lightnings, and there was no other choice. No other fighter in the theater had the range. The P-38, twin tail booms, twin Allison engines, a nose cluster of 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, could reach 414 miles per hour and survive the kind of long overwater flight that a single-engine fighter could not. Even the P-38 needed help. Special drop tanks, fitted beneath the wings, added enough fuel to make the arithmetic work. Barely. 18 aircraft were selected, 16 for the attack, 2 spares. They would fly from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. The plan called for a 550-mile approach at wave-top level, below Japanese radar coverage, below any altitude that might give them away. In absolute radio silence for the duration of the flight. No corrections, no confirmation, no ability to know whether the bearing was holding. The man who solved the navigation problem was Major John W. Mitchell, commanding officer of the 339th Fighter Squadron. On the evening of April 17th, Mitchell sits with a Navy compass and a chart and works through the geometry by hand. The intercept point is a precise location in the open Pacific sky. The target will be there at a precise minute. Mitchell has to put 16 aircraft at that exact location, at that exact moment, having flown 2 hours over featureless ocean by dead reckoning, with no ability to check or correct his course. He does the calculations. He writes down the headings. He has 1 night to get them right. At 7:25 the following morning, the P-38s lift off from Henderson Field and drop to the deck. They fly south, then west, cutting wide around the Japanese radar envelope. The pilots hold formation at wave-top height. Spray on the canopies, the horizon a flat gray line, nothing below but open water. No one speaks on the radio. There is nothing to say and no safe way to say it. Mitchell watches the clock and holds his heading. 2 hours and 550 miles later, at 9:34, the formation arrives at the intercept point. 1 minute early, 1 minute early, by compass and dead reckoning, across 2 hours of open ocean, against a target whose schedule had been fixed in cipher 4 days ago. The man who calculated that by hand, in a tent on a coral airstrip the night before, arrived 1 minute early. And as the P-38S reached the point, Yamamoto's aircraft descend into view through the haze. The call goes out. Bogies, 11 o'clock high. Mitchell's order comes immediately. Skin off your tanks. The auxiliary drop tanks fall away, and the P-38s turn and climb. The plan had called for 4 aircraft in the kill flight: Captain Thomas Lanphier, First Lieutenant Rex Barber, Lieutenant Besby Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond Hine. But Holmes's drop tanks fail to release. He cannot attack with the dead weight still attached, and Hine stays with him. That leaves 2 P-38s for the kill, Lanphier and Barber. The escort Zeros, 6 of them, drop their own tanks and come down to engage. Lanphier turns into them head-on, drawing them away. Barber banks steeply, chasing the Bettys. What happened in the next few minutes was disputed for the rest of 2 men's lives. What is not disputed is the outcome. The lead Betty, Yamamoto's aircraft, goes into the jungle. The second Betty, carrying Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, crashes into the sea. Holmes, his tanks finally freed, accounts for the second one. Ugaki is pulled from the water, alive. The question is, who killed Yamamoto? Lanphier tells it this way: a long burst from roughly right angles across the bomber's course of flight as it passed below him. The right engine catches. The wing comes off. The Betty goes in. Barber tells it differently. He pressed from behind, firing into the right engine, the rear fuselage, the empennage. He watched the Betty roll left, trailing black smoke, and watched it go into the jungle and explode. There were 2 men and 1 downed Betty. The damage patterns examined on the wreckage after the war show all the hits from behind and below, the geometry of a pursuit attack, not a crossing burst from range. Japanese Zero pilots who were there gave accounts consistent with Barber's version. The American Fighter Aces Association reviewed the evidence and in 1991 reversed the wartime credit, awarding the kills solely to Barber. Lanphier died in 1987, still insisting. Barber died in 2001. The wreck has been there the whole time. Barber's P-38 took approximately 104 hits from Zero fire during the engagement. He flew it home. Lieutenant Raymond Hine did not return. As the P-38S approached Henderson Field, Lanphier's voice came over the radio. "That son of a bitch will not be dictating any peace terms in the White House." The secret was already unraveling before the wheels touched the coral. The following morning, Japanese ground parties push into the jungle on the southern tip of Bougainville. They find the crash site, the lead Betty, broken open in the dense undergrowth, wreckage scattered through the trees, and in the debris, still strapped to his seat, still clutching his samurai sword, they find Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. 2 bullet wounds, 1 in the jaw, 1 in the shoulder. The medical determination, made at the site, is that he was dead before the plane hit the ground. The men of the search party, Japanese naval officers who had served under him, who understood what the sword meant and why he carried it, used 1 word to describe what they found. Songen. Dignity. His body was cremated on Bougainville. His ashes were taken aboard the IJN Musashi, one of the 2 largest battleships ever built, 72,000 tons, 18-inch guns, the embodiment of the naval power he had commanded, and carried to Tokyo. And then Tokyo said nothing. 33 days of silence. The imperial household knew, the high command knew, every senior officer in the combined fleet knew. Admiral Minechi Koga was quietly appointed to replace him, and publicly, officially, the Japanese Empire said nothing. The propaganda apparatus needed time. The shock needed to be processed. The announcement needed to be crafted so that nothing in it could tell the Americans how badly it hurt, or confirm that it had happened at all precisely because Japan's cipher had been read. Meanwhile, in Washington and across the South Pacific Theater, the Americans were holding their own silence. The mission was classified. The cover story was in place. But Lanphier's radio call had spread faster than any official telegram. A P correspondent, J. Norman Lodge, had the story confirmed and written and ready to transmit, and military censors would not let it through. On one side of the Pacific, an empire was holding its breath. On the other, an army was whispering in the dark. 2 parallel information blackouts, each side sitting on the same secret, each desperate to control what the other would learn from its release. May 21st, 1943. 33 days after the jungle on Bougainville. The Tokyo broadcast goes out. An Imperial Headquarters announcement, read live on air, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, met gallant death in a warplane while directing operations on the front line in April. The FCC monitors in the continental United States transcribe it in real time. They note in their reports that the announcer's voice became choked toward the end of the communiqué, that he seemed overcome with the weight of his news. A voice reading a prepared statement, breaking down on the air. An empire, after 33 days of silence, finally saying what it knew. What followed was organized and formal and thorough. A state funeral was set for June 5th, only the second granted to a naval officer in Japanese history, the first having been Admiral Togo, the man who commanded at Tsushima when young Ensign Yamamoto lost 2 fingers and came home. The ceremony was held with full national honors. His ashes were divided, part to Tama Cemetery in Tokyo, part to his ancestral home in Nagaoka. And the men who organized it were the same men who had once threatened his life. The military faction that had pushed Japan to war over Yamamoto's objections, the same ultranationalist clique that had made Tokyo dangerous enough for his colleagues to send him to sea, now claimed his death for the cause he had privately known was lost. The propaganda apparatus produced a patriotic martyr. They built the myth with everything available to them: ceremony, grief, the weight of a nation's wounded pride. The man who had written, plainly, that he had no expectation of success against America was now the symbol of Japan's resolve to fight on. He had predicted the war. He had fought the war. He had been killed in the war, and now he was being conscripted into its propaganda by the very men who had once wanted him dead for opposing it. The circle closed. On the American side, the secret held, or held well enough. Japan tightened its JN-25 procedures in the weeks after Yamamoto's death. But the Japanese never concluded definitively that their codes had been broken. No wholesale revision of the intelligence architecture. America's code-breaking advantage. The capability that had helped win Midway, that had put 16 P-38s at a precise point in the sky on the morning of April 18th, continued to operate. Nimitz had gambled a strategic intelligence asset against the possibility of killing one admiral. He kept both. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki survived the crash of his Betty into the sea on the morning of April 18, 1943. He was pulled from the water. He lived. He outlasted his commander by more than 2 years, witnessed the collapse of everything they had both commanded, and reached the morning of August 15, 1945. The day the Emperor's recorded voice came over the radio and announced surrender. That afternoon, Ugaki put on his Vice Admiral's uniform and boarded a dive bomber at Oita Air Base. He was told there were no aircraft available. He found one anyway. He climbed into the rear seat of a Yokosuka D-4Y Suisse and ordered the pilot to take off. 2 more aircraft followed. They flew south toward Okinawa, toward the American fleet. None of them returned. Ugaki was the last kamikaze death of the Pacific War. The man who escaped the ambush over Bougainville went into the sea the day the war ended. The wreck of Yamamoto's Mitsubishi G4M is still in the jungle on Bougainville. The tail section is the most visible piece. The Hinomaru, the red circle on white, weathered now, half consumed by 8 decades of tropical growth, but still there. Vines have moved through the fuselage. Trees have closed over what the jungle found. Researchers still make the trek to reach it. No one has moved it. It has been there since the morning of April 18, 1943. Isoroku Yamamoto told his government, before the first bomb fell on Pearl Harbor, exactly what a long war against the United States would mean. He wrote it down. He put it in a letter to the Prime Minister and said it plainly, without decoration, in the voice of a man who had stood at the edge of American industry and done the arithmetic. In the first 6 to 12 months of a war with the United States and Great Britain, I will run wild and win victory upon victory. But then, if the war continues after that, I have no expectation of success. The war continued. He was right about everything. He did not live to see it proven.